Hello, and welcome back to the Caliphs, the rise and fall of Arab power. My name is Zaid Wahab, and today we're going to pick up our narrative where we left off, with al-Muqtafi's much younger half-brother, Ja'far. The 13-year-old set a new record for youngest caliph to take the throne, and he'll sit on it for a record length as well. His long reign will prove so ruinous that the Abbasids never quite managed to recover. It was a dizzying fall from grace, and we'll have to slow down a bit to take it all in. For now, let's just focus on setting the scene. We'll introduce the young man, discuss his chaotic first few months in charge, and meet some of this era's leading personalities in episode 82, The Rise of al-Muqtadir. I'm afraid there's no avoiding a messy discussion today, dear listeners. It's the same whenever we get a weak caliph. Several new characters suddenly burst onto the scene, each with their own backstory, agenda, and enemies. It doesn't take too many to significantly complicate our narrative, and a young monarch is a magnet to these sorts of Machiavellian figures. Normally, I just cut to the chase, but I really want us to attain a firm grasp of this part of our history. In a very real way, this is the end of the classical caliphate. You know, the one with an ummah united behind a respected and commanding caliph. There won't be an instantly identifiable collapse, and we'll still cover a few more rulers together. But Ja'far's reign will mark a point of no return for Abbasid power, and it behooves us to try and figure out why. In order to find these insights, we're going to have to get into the weeds a little more than we usually do. That's not the only notable change in methodology from here on out either. It was a challenge to draft this episode, as it was the first time I rely almost entirely on material from outside our primary sources. Al-Tabari is very brief on this period. He's just wrapping up his magnum opus with events he witnessed in his 60s. Al-Mas'udi teases us by saying he's read over 1,000 pages about al-Muqtadir's long reign, so he does not intend to add more to such a well-worn subject. His account contains lots of poetry, trivia, and hearsay, though we do come across useful tidbits here and there. Anyway, just because our sources don't have much to offer doesn't mean we're out of luck. Al-Mas'udi's misleading opener says as much, and he's right. We find plenty of material about this era elsewhere. The problem is the considerable disparity between the accounts. We'll encounter an excellent example of this sort of disagreement early on in the new caliph's reign. Let's get started with a brief introduction of the boy so we can find out more about a failed coup against him and the different theories that try to explain what was going on. There's really not much to say about our latest Abbasid specimen in way of introduction. Ja'far was born in 895, so a couple years into his father al-Muqtadid's glorious reign. His ascension took place without a hitch, only 2 days after his half-brother passed away in August 908. Al-Muqtafi died of scrofula, a lymphatic disease known as the King's Evil in Europe and as Da' al-Khanazir in Arabic, or swine sickness. Al-Muqtafi's wazir, Abbas, dutifully took pledges for the young Ja'far, and bestowed upon him the regnal title Al-Muqtadir Billah, he who is enabled by God. Since he was only 13 when he ascended the throne, Ja'far would have spent most of his days in his mother's harem up until then. The queen mother, Shaghab, abused her influence over her son to ensure she and her handmaids enjoyed immense power during his reign. While it's true that Arab histories, indeed all histories, have a tendency to vilify women who aspire for authority, the condemnation is well earned in this case. Shaghab's corruption will prove to be one of the most pernicious aspects of the caliph's court. The earliest reports we find about al-Muqtadir's reign are not encouraging. One account says the new caliph bestowed riches upon his friends with a profligacy never seen before. Another mentions a riot by the troops, who were angry for not having received the customary awards following a change of leadership. It's clear that the new administration was worse than anticipated. It took less than 4 months of this mismanagement before certain elements in the state felt compelled to step in. They decided it was their responsibility to set things straight by orchestrating a coup. Al-Muqtadir came to power in August, and his father's cousin Abdullah ibn al-Mu'taz must have been approached before December. Abdullah was a respected member of the ruling clan in his late 40s, although he was best known as a poet, not a politician. We'll go through 3 different takes on the affair in order to get a better idea of what it was all about. We're not here to gawk at the confusion, but to ascertain whether this new government was doomed from the start, or if it survived because it had the potential of becoming a serious outfit. The first version of the coup story is the simplest one. We'll call it Bad Arabs. It says that Hussein ibn Hamdan, the caliphate's highest-ranking Arab general, conspired with a number of mostly Arab officials to replace al-Muqtadir with a more respected member of the ruling clan. The Wazir Abbas may have caught wind of their plot, or been informed of it, or indeed even been a part of it before changing his mind. But whatever happened, his murder by the plotters invariably marks the start of the coup. Hussein and some troops killed the Wazir, then chased after the caliph. Al-Muqtadir's entourage managed to barricade themselves in a wing of the palace. They defended their position and caliph so well that their assailants gave up on forcing their way in. Meanwhile, the coup went ahead at full speed. Many influential functionaries numbered among the conspirators: judges, commanders, secretaries, and the like. They arranged a mass pledging to Abdullah that same day and sent missives to the various provinces informing them of the change at the top. Abdullah wisely insisted that no Abbasid blood should be spilt, no doubt recalling how the anarchy had been kicked off by dynastic infighting. He sent a messenger to his young kin to let him know that the Ummah had spoken, and that he had only until the next day to vacate the palace. Al-Muqtadir's posse were all but defeated. With him stood members of the caliph's personal guard, a couple Turkish leaders, and his recently deceased wazir's secretary, Ali ibn al-Furat. Now that they had nothing to lose, they rallied together for a raid against Abdullah's camp that same night. Somehow these defenders managed to sneak messages to loyalists outside and clandestinely synchronized their attack. The usurpers had apparently not planned for this contingency whatsoever, and Abdullah's defenders scattered as soon as they saw the armed men charging at them, leaving the poor Abbasid to fend for himself. Abdullah absconded to Samarra, perhaps hoping that those who had pledged to him earlier that day would still support him. Chaos ensued for a couple nights, as Baghdad's police chief, another backer of the coup, fled the city as well. Al-Muqtadir's supporters took control of the court, and his troops swiftly dealt with anyone involved in the fiasco that they could get their hands on. They did not share Abdullah's compunction about spilling Abbasid blood. because he was captured and killed before the month was over. The only central plotter who remained at large was Husayn ibn Hamdan. Shockingly, he was granted a pardon only a few months later and welcomed back into the Abbasid fold. This is probably my favorite take on the coup. Not only does it contain as little speculation as possible, but more importantly, it privileges the military reality over political ambitions. While other versions contend that bureaucrats were behind the whole affair, this one makes it crystal clear that it is the man with the armies who is in charge. The caliph only had the court guard with him in Baghdad that fateful December, and Husayn ibn Hamdan's forces managed to get them on the run while they enjoyed the element of surprise. If you're wondering why Husayn withdrew instead of keeping al-Muqtadir's posse surrounded, then I can offer you a couple of the theories I've found. Some claim Husayn realized the coup had failed as soon as the caliph escaped capture, that he fled the city in haste in order to escape al-Muqtadir's wrath. A more plausible explanation says that when Abdullah took power and stressed that he wanted no Abbasid blood spilled, Husayn figured that there was nothing left to do in Baghdad. He and his army could be put to better use elsewhere, ensuring compliance with the new regime. The Hamdanids' withdrawal gave al-Muqtadir's guards the window they needed to pull their revolt. The Hamdanids' withdrawal gave al-Muqtadir's guards the window they needed to pull their reverse coup. It's crazy to think how a casual decision turned out to be so consequential. But we should also give the guards their due. As evidenced by the successful defense of their position, these were a formidable bunch. The force was named the Hujriya, or the Chamber Guard, and it had been created by al-Muqtadir. They were an elite squad of well-funded and well-trained military slaves reporting to the caliph directly. If you recall, I'd quoted the daily expense required to fund the court at the time to be 7,000 dinar. Well, 1,500 of these went to the Hujriya, the biggest expense by a wide margin. They probably didn't have much to do during al-Muqtafi's days, but I guess insurance is only expensive until you need it, because they paid for themselves several times over during this coup. With them were the Hajib and a military commander, both Turks and both named Mu'nis, unfortunately. Mu'nis the general will be by far the more important one, though the wazir's secretary, Ali ibn al-Furat, will also be a major figure. Everyone involved in al-Muqtadir's defense was rewarded and entrusted with power, but Mu'nis and Ibn al-Furat will be especially important characters to keep an eye on. Okay, let's proceed with version 2, which is really just a minor variation we'll call Bad Wazir. Accounts in this vein contend that al-Muqtafi never named an heir, and that succession was in the hands of his wazir Abbas. Abbas knew that the more mature Abdullah was the right choice, but he nefariously picked a boy instead, hoping to become the real power behind the throne. He realized he had messed up only a few months into al-Muqtadir's reign when the caliph proved harmful and uncontrollable. Abbas thus resolved to overthrow the caliph and replace him with his original choice. He joined others to work towards this noble goal, but at the last minute he was bribed by an agent of the caliph's corrupt mother and changed his tune yet again. Husayn killed the wazir for this betrayal, and the rest of the story unfolded as before. The only thing I appreciate about this version is that it sneaks in a preview of how Shaghab, the Queen Mother, is remembered in Arab history. What I don't like is its presumption that the wazir could just pick whomever he wanted. That ignores the very foundation of the reconstituted caliphate. The Abbasid state had been rebuilt on the relationship Talha had forged with the troops. His son Al-Muqtadir took after him, and he brought about the caliphate's revival through an overwhelmingly martial time in charge. It's clear, from the moment his father died a year before his reign, the army would not accept any other Abbasid as caliph. Al-Muqtadir's legitimacy was strong enough to ensure his son a smooth ascension. Even though the domineering Wazir Qasim had managed to take bureaucratic control of the army, ordering the troops to pledge to any random Abbasid was a step too far. As ever, their leadership strove to build personal relationships with the caliph, and they would accept none other than Al-Muqtadir's sons. Now for the third and final version of the coup story. This is another minor variation off the Bad Wazir one, but get comfortable, because it's going to take us a while to go through it. The account shines a spotlight on Ali ibn al-Furat, who, as we've mentioned, will be a key figure in al-Muqtadir's long reign to come. It contains much speculation, but it's important for us to learn all we can about this official and why he was such a big deal. You know, on my first few forays into this history, I recall coming away with the impression that the feud between the secretarial factions of the Banu Furat and the Banu Jarrah was critically important and had hidden depths to be plumbed. Now that I've gone through the material more closely, I realize that the conflict between them was far less direct than advertised. They were just two sets of bureaucrats with the skills necessary to manage the state who happened to compete during a time of decline. Later historians, especially ones from a secretarial background, focus on them to try and draw lessons about their own professions and the follies of administrative power. For consistency's sake, we'll call this version Bad ibn al-Furat. A lot of names are going to be thrown at you in the next couple minutes, so brace yourself and give me as much of your attention as you can muster. I'm going to list all the characters here up front just in case it helps. We have to go way back in time to tell this story. We'll mention Al-Mu'tamid's Wazir ibn Bulbul, Al-Mu'tadid's Wazir Ubaydullah, Ubaydullah's tyrannical son and successor Qasim, two of the Banu Furat, the brothers Ahmad ibn al-Furat and Ali ibn al-Furat, and two of the Banu Jarrah, one of them named Ali ibn Isa ibn al-Jarrah. Ahmad and Ali ibn al-Furat made their debut in Arab history during Al-Mu'tamid's reign in the 880s. They assisted his Wazir ibn Bulbul by managing tax collection. The Banu Furat succeeded because theirs was a wealthy and well-connected Baghdadi merchant family, and their father had enjoyed a long career serving the state before them. They were highly educated and had a fluency with capital that came from years of experience in commerce. The Banu Furat brothers were arrested when Al-Mu'tadid's regime came to town, but his Wazir Ubaydullah wisely released them so they could return to the jobs they seemed to be so uniquely suited for. These were the best years. Remember how we described the triumvirate that secured the caliphate's prosperity? Well, some accounts call it a quartet, and they named the fourth member who worked harmoniously along Al-Mu'tadid, Badr, and Ubaydullah as Ahmad ibn al-Furat. This golden era ended when Qasim came into the picture. After taking a more active role assisting his father, he convinced the Wazir to replace the Banu Furat with the Banu Jarrah in 899. When Ubaydullah passed away in 901 and Qasim officially became Wazir, he moved on to larger targets. But the Banu Furat were barred from serving in high office during his tenure. Qasim worked closely with the Banu Jarrah, and when he passed away in 904, he recommended that he be succeeded either by Ali ibn Isa ibn al-Jarrah or his own secretary, Abbas. We're not told why Ibn al-Jarrah did not accept the role, only that it went to Abbas. Al-Muqtafi's new wazir didn't make any dramatic changes, and he continued to rely on the Banu Jarrah just like his predecessor. Qasim's death had created a vacancy, though, and Ali ibn al-Furat pulled every string he could to get appointed as secretary to the new wazir. Without Qasim around to blackball him any longer, he got the job, and Abbas came to depend on the seasoned Ibn al-Furat during his years of service. Now that the cast is all assembled, let's get to how these personalities impacted the rumors surrounding al-Muqtadir's ascension. Just like with Bad Wazir, in these accounts, the responsibility of picking the next caliph fell to Abbas because al-Muqtafi failed to name a successor. Abbas first asked the Banu Jarrah for their opinion, and they indicated a strong preference for Abdullah ibn al-Mu'taz, whom they described as possessing a virtuous and noble character. Abbas was ready to nominate Abdullah until he asked Ibn al-Furat what he thought about the issue, and received a very different answer. Ibn al-Furat convinced Abbas that Abdullah would remove him from power as soon as he was on the throne. The young Ja'far, on the other hand, would not only rely on his capable wazir for at least the next few years, but he's sure to be eternally grateful as well. Tempted by the empty promises of Ibn al-Furat, Abbas picked the 13-year-old boy and doomed the Ummah with his folly. The rest of the story goes the same as the other two. One of the few things this speculative account brings to the table is that it explains the positions of the two secretarial factions regarding the failed coup. The Banu Jarrah allied with Hussein ibn Hamdan in his attempt to overthrow al-Muqtadir, while Ibn al-Furat sheltered with the caliph that night. One of the Banu Jarrah lost his life after the coup, while Ali ibn Isa ibn al-Jarrah, the guy who passed on the chance to be wazir, survived and would go on to serve as wazir. Even though we're only 4 months into al-Muqtadir's reign, I think we've covered quite enough for today. The best thing we can do to prepare ourselves further is to flesh out some of the new characters we've met by saying more about the roles they'll play in the coming years. Of the 3 I want to bring up, only the first left a one-dimensional impression on history: the caliph's mother. Shaghab is remembered as corrupt, greedy, and selfish. Considering her son's age, she couldn't have been very old herself, probably under 30 years old. As the caliph's mother, she was forbidden from leaving the harem. Trapped in her luxurious confines, she used her handmaids to run any and every part of the government that she fancied. Handmaids is not the right word. It's difficult to translate qahramana, a Persian loanword that's somewhere between chief of staff, treasurer, and head butler. These madams were kind of the wazirs of the harem. Anyway, the queen mother's qahramanat used their relative freedom of mobility to manage her business empire on her behalf. There was nothing entrepreneurial about her endeavors. It was all just straight-up graft. We'll talk about it in more detail another time, but Shaghab caused the Ummah nothing but grief. The next 2 characters require a more nuanced discussion. Ali ibn al-Furat stood with the caliph in his hour of need. For his loyalty, he was made al-Muqtadir's next wazir. As you can imagine, the mother and son were both grateful to have such an accomplished civil servant manage the treasury, and everything was cordial between the 3. A few years later, however, money issues soured their relationship as the ruling family became a huge drain on the public purse. Tensions flared, and Ibn al-Furat was blamed and punished, but later on he was forgiven and restored. This cycle repeated itself 3 times, then ended badly for everybody. As if Ibn al-Furat's discussion wasn't complicated enough, we have to then add on the secretarial rivalry angle. Ibn al-Furat and Ibn al-Jarrah were the only two of al-Muqtadir's many wazirs who managed to do the job well. They survived long enough in the role to have discernible government styles or policy objectives. Many commentators interpret the contrast between them as a feud. That's only accurate in the sense that there were two bureaucracies capable of running the state, and only one of them could be in office. They weren't competing visions for how things ought to be. Sure, there were some differences, but it was mostly about who gets to do the job. Because bad things happened on his watch, Ibn al-Furat has retrospectively come to be seen by some as the bad wazir, and Ibn al-Jarrah the good wazir. I don't want to propagate this view. It's unfounded, and the oldest sources make no such value judgments. The final character to discuss is Mu'nis, not the Hajib, the general. The Hajib kept his job until he died about a decade later. The general, though, will be someone to keep an eye on. He's the only one of the bunch who will outlive the caliph. Mu'nis will play the classical role of the indefatigable warhorse during al-Muqtadir's reign. He was Big Bugha, Little Bugha, and Wasif combined. He was better than Badr. His skill will save the caliphate from all sorts of foes, and best of all, he had defended the caliph when he needed him the most, so he was trusted implicitly by the ruling cadre. It was almost like the Abbasids were saved by that fluke of a coup which had created exactly the kind of bond the state required to flourish, one between a caliph and a Turkish commander. Like all good things, sadly, the relationship didn't last. At least, not a natural lifetime. Things were good for a while, though. As ever, our historians put on their rose-tinted glasses whenever misfortune looms around the corner. There was nothing idyllic about al-Muqtadir's time in charge, but culture, science, and commerce all flourished while he squandered the considerable fortune amassed by his brother and father before him. Some of Arab civilization's great thinkers lived during his days, and I'd be negligent if I gave you the impression that everything was doom and gloom 24/7. You'll have to give it a minute. With that, I think we've laid a good foundation for our discussion of al-Muqtadir's time in charge. He's going to enjoy a very long reign, so it would be difficult to go through it chronologically. We'll take a thematic approach instead, and discuss its civil, military, and dynastic developments separately. Our first topic will be the administration itself, and we'll learn more about the caliph's mom, who was a real piece of work, and the long list of wazirs who served at al-Muqtadir's pleasure. The caliphate's finances will take a nosedive, and we'll witness the fallout together next time, here on The Caliphs, the rise and fall of Arab power.